I was going to say, for those people who don't know me and those people who don't know Mike Ward, I'm not Mike Ward, I'm John Hodgson. I work with Mike Ward at Scrip Intelligence, which is a pharmaceutical newsletter. And my job is to get you to use our panel of agony aunts in open innovation to solve your problems. And what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to give us 1 minute and 1 minute only. We will chop them off on themselves and their organization. You can take less, please do. It's all on the internet if you don't. And 1 minute on an open innovation, good example, open innovation, bad example. Don't talk about the solutions. If you guys don't have any problems, we'll just talk about their solutions. Okay, so can I start at this end? Introduce yourself. Good and bad, 2 minutes, go.
All right, so my name is Leblanc. I'm the president and CEO and a co-founder of Caprion Proteomics, which is a proteomics service provider to the pharma and biotech industries. The company was founded in 2001, and I can really attest to being in a sector, proteomics, that has seen more small company roadkill than it's been pretty well any other over the last 10 years. And so I feel privileged to be among the few survivors. I know there's a few others in the room that are survivors of this of the last 5 or 10 years, and I congratulate them for that. So, but it's been all about open innovation along the way. Much unlike the Human Genome Project, proteomics never benefited from the substantive funding, or nearly as substantive funding as what the genomics industry was able to benefit from. And I think the example of the Human Genome Project is probably one of the most important examples of an open innovation project that perhaps certainly succeeded at delivering on what it set out to do, probably hyped it up a little more than the impact of it, or the near-term impact of it, but certainly ended up and is continually improving on the delivery of that output. In proteomics, it's been the same with fewer resources, but we've had to adapt, and we've seen collaboration between instrument manufacturers, reagent suppliers, private company examples collaborating with pharmaceuticals on drug target discovery, on biomarker discovery, and biomarker validation. And we've seen the pendulum, you know, the evolution of the industry evolve towards more complete funding by pharma in the early days to now consortia-based funding and public-private partnership funding. And I've been a witness of 2 examples in the Quebec environment and in the US environment that have given me some sort of pros and cons. But I think that at the end of the day, if you had to kind of boil it down to some of the key ingredients for success, I think having a true...
Can I stop you there, Mark? Because we don't want the solutions yet. We want the problems. I didn't hear the problem. What's your problem?
Problems is when they are not, these are going to be funded, and they're going to be funded by human beings, and the rules of the game have to be clearly defined, and if they're not, you're going to get pretty well...
Funding and rules. Okay,
and
thanks.
I think I've seen both sides. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll come back to it.
Yep.
Good morning, my name is...
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. My name is John Bell, I'm from Philips. I'm head of strategy and business development of Philips Research. So probably one of the few people in the room who has no pharma or biotech background. We have a lot of things around open innovation, and I think one of the examples some people wouldn't know and would talk about is the high-tech campus we have created in Eindhoven, which was a place where only Philips Research was present 10 years ago, and now there are more than 100 companies, very small and large, some competitors, some service companies, and it's a real vibrant place for innovation. And I don't want to take companies away from this side to Eindhoven, so don't you worry about it. Some of the challenges we have around open innovation is how to get more out of open innovation. How to get more mature options into our company, and how to continue to help our people to understand that it's not invented here is just a mindset.
So one problem is in external, getting more mature innovation in, and the other problem is the internal dialogue that needs to happen to get your people to accept that stuff coming in is worthwhile as the things that they've spent their life on.
No.
Okay. Here.
I'm Ian Thomas. I'm head of the Life Science Group at the University of Cambridge Tech Transfer Company, so I work with Christine. And you obviously know our mission. So I've got really two examples of where we've tried sort of open innovation activities, one which gave rise to a frankly disastrous problem, and one which, and we've also got more recent one with GSK, which I can talk about a little bit, where we solved that. I won't talk about the solution, but it addresses the point. So several years ago, we had a collaboration that was long before the sort of the words open innovation were used, with an SME local to the Cambridge region and one elsewhere in Europe. And really, it was about looking at very interesting new disease models for disease areas that were particularly poorly accommodated by animal models. And all parties went into it in, let's say, a way that was, you could argue, a little too jolly. And there was a lot of bonhomie, everybody wanted to make it work. But the long and the short of it was that we did actually generate some very valuable intellectual property, some of that registrable and some of that just know-how. And I got brought into this situation where clearly various parties wanted to make something of this. And it was clear that this had not been set out in advance terribly well, and it was whose fault? It was all parties. We all signed up to the agreement, we'd all made a mistake. But what happened was, the parties hadn't talked well, they were at loggerheads. I walked into the room late, unfortunately, to see the classic sort of their side, our side, and no one was talking to each other, including various people looking out the windows. And I just not. I mean, and some people were shaking red at one point. But the point was, all trust had broken down. We'd lost any ability to capitalise on what was actually a huge amount of information that had been generated. You may want to say what the commercial outcome could have been and who should get their spoils. But we were so far from actually understanding how this should work, and we'd lost trust.
So something to do with not professionalising the relationship at the start in terms of intellectual property.
People had unrealistic expectations. Professionalising at the start does not mean it's not open.
Right.
We've just recently entered a DPAC collaboration with Professor Lomas that Patrick Valance mentioned in his keynote this morning. And I think one of the most interesting points about that is it's dealt with all the issues that we saw there, but also one of the major problems is, and there was a bit of technology transfer office bashing earlier, which is we as a group are very frequently accused of mispricing or having inappropriate expectations of what a fair return should be. But likewise, we have to get a fair return, and so both parties have to think about clever ways of doing that. And I think we've concluded a deal with GSK. What was amazing is how quickly the terms were reached in terms of the commercial, and it was and the solution was trying about thinking about how to deal with that.
Okay, I want to bring Mike in now from Unilever.
Yeah, my name's Mike Shaw. I know one or two people in the room. I work for Unilever. It's one of the juggernauts that was described earlier as causing some damage. I'm Director of Licensing based in the UK. Our R&D is about 6,000 people based across the world. We do a lot of what I would call open innovation, as described this morning, although the definition of open innovation is subject to ratification depending on where you sit. In terms of success and failures, I would tend to do what somebody else did earlier, was talk about challenges. Somebody's success can be somebody else's failure and vice versa. The challenges that are prevalent at the moment in a large company like Unilever, bearing in mind we have 160, 170 employees around the world, and OI is just not for R&D. It covers business models, co-marketing, co-distribution, sales, A&P. It really means sharing risk at all levels. And it was interesting to see the thing about the business models on one slide today, other than technology driven. So we tend to be business models as well. In terms of challenges, when dealing with small companies, and we almost always are dealing with smaller companies than Unilever by definition, it's about things like managing expectations and alignment, both internally and with the third party, not to overpromise and to keep everybody online with developments in a timely fashion. And I think the other one is that we often forget in big companies that it's about a relationship and the interactions between two parties, and quite often there are many issues with that in terms of culture embedded in the company, and also cultures about different countries, because we're a worldwide product-focused company, and we source our innovation from all over the world. So the challenges are many. But basically one
So Mike, what you're saying is basically that the issues for you are more on in the soft area, aligning
Yeah,
expectations and managing the relationship further on, as opposed to the internal not invented here,
Absolutely,
which
yeah,
we heard
it's
from
all
Philip.
about, if you asked one thing, it would probably be all about communication.
Okay, great. And Simon, different type of group, but
Sure.
please tell us your experience.
So I don't know anything about bioscience. I'm probably the least qualified and educated person in this entire room. But I have a 10% higher chance than solving any of these problems of these companies than any of you. My name is Simon Schneider. I'm from Innocentive. What we do is exactly that. We take problems that people have because we believe that you, your cousin, your mother, your uncle, you can provide input to problems of insiders. So did I make this up with the 10%? No. We've done at Innocentive for 10 years 1,500 of these open innovation competitions. We're taking problems and throwing them to the crowds. Millions of people who are our solvers, innovators that subscribe to us. We did a project with Harvard University where a professor looked at our data set, and he found out that if you're not in that industry, you actually have a 10% higher chance of solving that insiders people's problem than people in the industry. Anyways, that's what Innocentive does. A good and a bad example, I think a good example is every good example about open innovation competition, that's what we do. It has to do with simplification and abstraction. I always say the crowd can only eat in single bites, which sounds a bit funny, but the point is that you need to abstract and make a problem small enough for the crowd to help you. So there's a lot of problems here that are probably disqualifying themselves for this type of open innovation because you don't ask the crowd to build an aircraft carrier. But a good example is the folded competition, if you want a name for it, which is a competition about the Pfizer-Mason virus. Long story short, it was about a problem that the industry, MIT, Harvard, Cambridge couldn't solve for 15 years. They made a game out of it. They made it smaller. They made it not as scientific. It took them 10 days to solve that. 15 years, 10 days. One of the winners was a retired teacher from Long Island in New York. She actually has no clue about any scientific chemistry whatsoever. She just liked the forms and the colors because her brain actually worked in a different way but solved a problem that the PhDs in this world couldn't. What's the negative side or negative examples? I think we heard about it from the previous speakers as well, is my biggest concern is if big companies, governments, foundations enter this open innovation space, you don't think too much about it in the beginning. I think whatever you plan to do, double the time and double the money you spend at the exploration phase in the beginning. I think you mentioned it, I think it's a theme that came up. Think about your ROI. What do you want to accomplish?
So don't minimize the project, basically.
Or just don't go into this open innovation thing because it's cool and we're talking about it today and you say, well, this is really exciting, let's do it. And then half a year later you look back and like, well, how do we measure our success? I think that came up earlier too. So I would say the biggest failures I've seen in our 10 years is if you don't think at the beginning hard enough about what is it, how do we measure it before you make an open innovation program.
So define the project and put it in bite-sized pieces.
Exactly.
All right, so now it's your turn, or it may not be your turn if you're not willing to share, but we are about open innovation here. So what I would like to happen here is that you pose questions which may be or may not be your own personal questions. It may have happened to you, your company, or it may be happened to somebody who's very like you, who works at a company very like yours that had this problem. But if there are enough people, and I'd like to just have a show of hands of people who would like to sort of pose that kind of question to see whether we can go that way, because otherwise what we're going to do is just ask these guys how they solve their problems. So it's your choice as to whether you want to put your hand up and say, let's talk about my problem, or let's talk about their problems. We've got enough hands. So if you guys are okay, I know it's just been a taster, and sorry to cut you all off, but we've only got a certain range. So the first hand I saw was way back there. Make it a question if you can, and these guys will give the answer. If you've got your answers, we'll take that later.
Thank you. Jackie Hunter, Alive Pharma Partners. In pharma companies, many of the ones I've talked to, I've asked how they incentivise their employees to engage in the external environment and open innovation activities. It turns out that most of the time, employees are rewarded actually for what they do internally, so the incentives are not really aligned. So my question is, how in your companies do you motivate and incentivise employees to engage in the external world and 50% of the time as the internal world?
Okay, so I think we should go to Mike from the Unilever perspective and John from a Philips perspective. Who wants to go first? How do you incentivise internally?
Okay, right. That's a really interesting, and it's a pertinent discussion at the moment in Unilever. We have targets that are set at the beginning of the year, which roll through the year, and they're monitored, and part of that is delivery. And actually, there's a misconception about...
Is this for all employees or just...
This is all employees, basically personal development plans, targets form the basis of that. At the end of the year, you get reviewed, and then part of that is a salary and a bonus. So that's the reward, in that the bonus and the salary are based to a great extent on your performance during the year.
I think you've switched your mic off, Mike.
Sorry, not intentionally. One of the problems is the question. Is what you're saying is are you rewarding people for delivery on their targets, or are you rewarding them for delivery on OI? And I would argue you shouldn't be rewarding people for delivery on OI, you should be rewarding them for project delivery. And if they use OI to deliver, then that's a bonus. But certain people will in our organisation have OI targets. There's no doubt I have got.
Can we get to numbers on that? How many employees have externally facing targets?
Oh, sorry, everybody has an external.
Okay, and what percentage of the overall target setting would you think is external?
I wouldn't know.
Okay.
What I would say is this, is that the reward is about target and is about project. And if you can use OI to deliver, and what we say is quite simply this. So when you've got a new project, you need to look at what that project is and whether you can deliver it 100% internally or whether you need to go out and deliver it or parts of it. So we talk about, are you going to basically do it internal, are you going to buy it, or are you going to ally? And then is it going to be delivered better, bigger, faster by going outside? So they're the sorts of ground rules that we use in Unilever to identify whether or not we should be using OI as a delivery. And some of our projects have a light touch of OI, and others are completely 100% delivered by OI.
Okay, I have to say it doesn't sound like that's a very simple solution. Okay, so move on to John. I don't mean to cut you off, but John, you say you have some issue with the not invented here, so I presume the incentives in Philips aren't quite big enough to make people face outwards at this point. Are you addressing that? How are you addressing that?
Yeah, in the same way as Unilever. Maybe that's the wrong way, but for us, optimization is a means and not an end in itself. So, and in our view, open innovation should be a natural way of working. So where we have in the past sometimes too often our people looked at, oh, we can do it better ourselves, because I think in many cases we have hired excellent researchers which have been hired to come up with great inventions and technologies and patents. And if we now tell them, oh, by the way, you also should look outside and maybe there's something else, and they get a little bit confused of that. So we also do the same. We look at what are the targets for people is to deliver on their projects. And we have different kind of projects, and open innovation is a means to an end. And we certainly hope to see, and we see very good examples where open innovation helps a lot to speed up, to get more effective, to come up also with completely new ideas which we never could have done before.
But open innovation is not a specific target necessarily. It's really one step removed linked to the project success. If you think you need to do open innovation to do your project, then you can go and do it and everyone's happy. But if you don't think that, then that's okay too.
No, that's too easy. Because we also want to change the mindset of the organization to make much more use of open innovation and to make it a natural way of working. So what we don't want is everybody to just stay always internally. So what we are doing is put a target for the organization and say, hey, so much of the transfers and the IP should come from open innovation.
But we already heard, at least from GSK's experience, that it's down to the people, and so that corporate target needs to translate.
Exactly.
I'm going to leave it there for the big company. Martin, just coming from a small company perspective, are there specific innovation targets that you can, a mechanism?
My company's business model relies on open innovation, so everybody in the company is quite clear on the fact that we will survive if we collaborate with pharma directly and if we collaborate with pharma indirectly through these public-private partnerships to solve their needs. So the incentives are quite clear. What I've learned a lot about is the incentives of bigger companies in pharma by interacting with them, and I think that the greatest incentive now is that it's a survival skill now, because the budgets have been steadily declining for especially the early stage discovery work. And I think the average PhD pharma researcher is very comfortable swimming in the academic and internal seas to be able to latch on to the right opportunities that are going to help them bring innovations into their companies. But I think that those companies that have created space for that, like created space and funding for that interaction to be more structured and more formalized, are going to have a far better chance of succeeding and drawing their employees in. I don't think pharma is in a 1,000 flowers bloom environment right now where we can just spawn tons of open innovation.
I think creating the space is an important part of it, and it struck me earlier listening to the discussion that in a big company you can at least designate a group of people, a specific group of people to focus on the external facing stuff. In the university environment, the academic environment, maybe it's naturally structured to be more catholically interested, but in a small company I imagine that you're just suffering the Red Queen syndrome. You have to run as fast as you can to stay where you are, and you would actually have to put something specific in place.
Can I just add
Okay.
one point? You're right about universities in terms of how our employees behave, but actually one of the difficulties for us is when we're, if you will, a consumer of other people's expertise as part of our open innovation activity, understanding how they work and how they're going to incentivize their people so we can then deliver on our thing is actually quite an important issue. So it's not about how we incentivize us and our people, it's about how we understand our collaborators need to do that. Otherwise we can fail.
Definitely, have you got a quick solution for these guys?
Well,
what they should be doing inside?
Well, I mean, I don't want to be too negative, but it sounds like, how do I phrase this nicely? I think you're only focusing on one aspect. I think I only heard money, money, money. And I think there is something, if you're looking at why people are incentivized to do work on stuff, money is one. I think you got one thing right. But we see that people want to solve on problems because, financial rewards. You want to be, there's reputation, seen amongst your equals or your boss or whoever, someone's giving you reputational awards. The third one is the actual intellectual challenge. So there's the third one, which is people actually work on things because they like to be intellectually challenged. Perhaps their day job sucks and they want to do something on the weekend and they actually do care. So they might, do work on something else. And fourth, people care. And I think this is one thing too, is we've seen competitions where we had a $500 reward. $500, nothing. We got 1,500 people working on this over weekends and on their vacations. Why? Because it was such a touching story, and it was something that people actually wanted to help that guy. Anyways, that's my, I think, part two, is don't just focus on the money. That's one of it. I think the rest is, and everybody, you have your own different setups, but there are more things why, again, coming back to my earlier question of think very carefully what drives people. I think then you find that it's more than just the money.
So you're saying mobilize personality and sympathies basically as much as anything else.
Well,
mobilize the other side of the brain that I don't have.
For example, I've worked with you make it sound funny, but because actually the target is exactly the opposite approach I would take. I've worked with a big consulting company in Europe, and so they have about 50,000 people worldwide, and they bought this clever open innovation technology tool. And turned out no one is using it. So the CEO said, great idea, I put this in everybody's target. Everybody has to put 5% of their working time on this shitty tool. Now, still no one is using it either. But people hate it. You talk to people in a consulting company like, I have to do my whatever. So I'm saying you might say, well, these soft things might sound funny. Actually, that's the core of it. It attracts people.
No, I'm not saying it's funny. I actually agree that it's an unexploited resource in most companies.
Right.
So-
Just on the reward structure thing, I agree entirely with that. Sometimes we get preoccupied by targets, delivery and reviews and the such like. What we've also found is that a lot of people who we didn't think would be very good at whatever open innovation is, doing open innovation, have suddenly become what we call stars. Is that they were suddenly seen as a real technology, this wasn't a better word, nerd, and that they would really not like what was going to happen next. And actually lifting them out of their local environment and interfacing them with externals has been very challenging and very intellectually stimulating. And a lot of people we found have suddenly gone from being very uncomfortable and not scared but frightened perhaps about the consequences of what they were about to do, have engaged with it, and the more they've done it, they've embraced it. And we've found that some people in Unilever are very good at doing what we didn't know they could do. And they've suddenly done, as you just said, they've suddenly been a different person. Their personal development plans have taken off in a different direction. And this has been an open window to them, which they never knew was there.
So you're using your employee base more holistically in a way.
Yeah, there is some culture changes needed, and there is some behaviour changes needed right away across in all big companies to implement any changes. But in this one, it is particularly important to get the relationship side and the soft skills side right, because you can destroy a relationship very early on by saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things. But in terms of personal development, as on the soft side of targets, a lot of people have benefited from their capabilities and their experiences and are becoming different people.
So Jackie, I hope that solves everything for you. Next question. I'm not going to go to you, Maura, because you had some airtime. There's a question back there. Sorry.
I've just got a comment first. I was involved in the Open Innovation Programme at Smith & Nephew, and one of the most successful things that we did was an innovation forum, and everybody would come together and talk about the internal ideas and the external ideas and almost rate them side by side.
So where are you now?
I'm now in a digital marketing firm, so I've got
Right.
off piece now. But essentially, in terms of the reward of and what kept it going and what made it interesting for people, is that was the peer recognition of their ideas being evaluated and then being taken up, both for the business development team and the internal teams.
Okay, do you have a question as well?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just the point I was going to make was one of the things that people looked forward to most was getting their award, and it was a box of Lego, and they had to make their own innovation award once they'd been successful. Anyway, my question is, how do you keep communication going between different parties in an open innovation project?
Okay, so the Lego promotional exercise here is going very well. You can report back. Yeah, take that, Martin.
One of the partnerships I've been involved in, this is the Quebec Consortium for Drug Discovery, which is a partnership with Pfizer, Merck, AstraZeneca, the Quebec government, and they are soliciting projects for pre-competitive research that is aligned to the industry needs. So the pharma partners are driving what kinds of research projects will spawn the kind of innovation they need, but they're doing so by saying that the field needs to be in the pre-competitive space. So they've created these contests where they ultimately select the winners. The winners need to be a combination of academic and biotech parties. And once they select the project, they set clear milestones, deliverables, and each of the companies, Pfizer, Merck, and AstraZeneca, has to assign an internal R&D organization mentor that is skilled in the art and the science of that project. So if it's a diabetes project, the project in Montreal will twice a year have a half-day or full-day meeting involving a diabetes expert from Sweden if it's AstraZeneca, or Huawei if it's Merck. They have to come to Montreal, or we go see them, and really discuss how the project is working. Is it aligned with their needs? Can it be realigned in the interim to better meet their needs at the end? And what you've got is three people who are competitors in their R&D, all of a sudden sharing stories in a bit of an uncomfortable environment about how they're developing their own drugs for this open innovation project to better succeed. And it was the first meeting was a kind of a tense one where everybody was on their guards. Pfizer didn't want to tell AstraZeneca and Merck what they were doing. About 3 years later, as the project is finishing, a much more open and collaborative and trust-based environment, because they found their niche, and their project has evolved along what they really want to do in ways that it never would have had they not been involved all the way along.
So there's a question here about, I mean, the issue seems to be how do you get people to share their problems, because admitting that you've got a problem is admitting that you need something that would have value, and basically you don't really want to admit that
in this
necessarily.
Case, sharing their solutions, because they might be proprietary, is even more of a barrier than sharing their problems.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, to comment on that, I agree. I mean, if you would ask me what is the question, kind of the problem that keeps me up at night, I think that is the collaboration amongst solution providers, whatever you call it, because we talk about open innovation, but what I said earlier is I still see a lot of, I think there's much more to it potentially, which is, can we get people to really work together on problems, and with a client or with a big company or not? And that is actually the thing that I don't think, you mentioned a couple of interesting ways of going around. I've seen many different ones, but that's probably the biggest barrier I see to really open innovation this up, is how do we get a small startup from Germany to work with perhaps a hospital, a PhD in the UK, and so on and so on. There are IP issues, there are trust issues. Anyways, I don't have a solution for it, but I think that question is also the one that I'm thinking about, and I'm not the only one, which is how do we get collaboration better done amongst people who want to work on a problem?
Okay, I want to open it up over there. Are you coming in with a comment on this discussion or another question?
On this particular discussion.
Carry on.
It's Mike Johnson from MRCT. I'm really interested in that one where you said one last is open innovation between what potentially are competitors, and you've got 3 pharmaceutical companies working together. Have they got a model of how that succeeds? I mean, do they all take a share with that to go forward? Or is it that one of them, do they bid amongst each other? How does that happen?
So
Okay, half a minute on this.
the rules of the game were quite clear when they entered, and that they were going to, the IP ownership stays with the project providers, the biotechs and the academics, who have to pre-agree on how they're sharing before the project can start. So the OTTs and the biotechs have to figure that out. What the pharma gets is a non-exclusive, research purpose only license to the results of the project, and if there's any background IP that would somehow prevent the use of those results, they have to get a fully paid up license to that background IP for that. I could go longer, but it's very clear. It works at the start, but the humans try and deviate from it, as the project gets closer and closer to having this material IP.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question. It needs to be a different topic. Someone's got a different question, yeah? A different questioner, if possible, yeah. I'll take a neighbour, unless you're related. Quick question.
We seem to be bouncing around the importance of people in open innovation. I'd be interested in hearing from the panel, what do you think key characteristics of a successful open innovation entrepreneur are?
So this is personal characters you're interested in, presumably handsome, outgoing, cheeky, that sort of stuff. Male, by the looks of it. Anyway, you've each got half a minute on this, because Malcolm has given us 2 minutes to let our dinner go even colder than it already is. Then we must stop, and we won't be able to burn ourselves on it. So half a minute on characteristics of the person. Yeah, Martin, or anybody.
Oh. I've been talking too much. I think people who care about the goals and are actually a little more self-aware of not only their own place in the universe, but their company's place in the universe, in terms of this is an uncomfortable thing, you're not going to be able to grab and control everything, and you're comfortable in this kind of sharing environment. And I think there's personalities of people who are much more adapted to that naturally than others, and you should probably steer those people towards these projects.
Yeah, I would say open people willing to collaborate and don't run away for difficult things, because it's much easier to stay in one company and know what's happening there. It's much more difficult to do it together with others. At least it could be much more difficult. It could also be much more fun. so people don't be shy of that. And
For us, given our main clients are academics, the most important thing is getting people who can admit they just don't know everything. I know that sounds obvious. But actually, it's our biggest problem. And it goes back to what Christine said. How do we first select people to come down here? It was because they're people who can go, I only know my basic bit of biology. I can see that there may be a dream here. I need help. And that
So
was
intelligent but unashamedly ignoramus.
Yes.
Yes.
And by the way, we're 2/3 women in our group. Just to be clear about that.
Right.
How long have you got?
Half a minute you've got. I've got the rest of my life. But
It may not be long enough. Okay, a whole raft of things, soft and hard skills, technical understanding of the area are important, but it's always the soft skills that trip people up. What I would say are key ones are things like being able to go into a discussion, stroke negotiation, to negotiate, not take a position, being thoroughly professional at all times, integrity, honesty, awareness of what's going on around you, and one of the key traits I believe is to see the other side of the argument, to be able to take a position that's alien to what you and your colleagues started with. I think also being able to conduct negotiations in a bar is important, and be the last person standing is always good.
so heavy drinker.
No, not a heavy drinker, a wise drinker.
Is that part of the interview process at Unilever? Okay.
It's always down to soft skills. It's always down to
Soft skills, and the fuzzier you can get them in the bar, the better. Okay. Stefan.
I think I agree with everything that's been said, but perhaps the one thing I would mention is also, which is not about the entrepreneur or the innovator, is the fit within the organization. So for example, I make sure that if you are that person described by this panel, perhaps if you're not a fit with your CEO or with the culture of an organization, then also don't try. I think that's another part that's important. Assess that before you embark on this. So for example, there was a conference where the COO of the Nona, the yogurt company, said something really, really cool. He said, I realized something, I'm not in charge anymore. My employees and my customers are, and I by myself have to learn how to give up control. And I mean, that's again, so from this side, if you're meeting all these skills and your CEO is saying that, you're good to go.
So not control freaks. Okay. Optimism as well. Okay, so on that note, we're going to have to wind things up.